بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدات والسادة، أيها الحضور الكرام، أود أن أبدأ كلمتي هذه بالإعراب عن شكر جامعة كارنيجي ميلون قطر لتنظيم هذه الفعالية وإتاحة هذه الفرصة لمخاطبة العديد من الزملاء والشركاء الأساسيين في قطاع التعليم والتدريب، خاصة في هذا الوقت الهام من بداية العام الدراسي. كما أود أن أغتنم هذه الفرصة لبيان أهمية استراتيجية قطاع التعليم والتدريب، باعتبارها دليل لنا جميعاً ولكل منظمة ومؤسسة تعليمية وتدريبية على هذه الأرض للمساهمة في تحقيق رؤية قطر 2030. إن رؤية قطر والتي تم وضعها بتوجيهات من سيدي سمو الأمير حفظه الله كانت نتاج سنوات عدة من التخطيط الشامل والتحليل الدقيق لتؤكد تحقيق الأهداف والقيم الوطنية طويلة الأجل التي تسعى إليها دولة قطر، والتي تعتمد على ركائز التنمية الأربع، وهي التنمية البشرية والاجتماعية والاقتصادية والبيئية. إن الهدف الطموح لتلك الرؤية هو الارتقاء بدولة قطر إلى مصاف الدول المتقدمة القادرة على تحقيق التنمية المستدامة وتأمين العيش الكريم لكافة أفراد شعبها جيلاً بعد جيل. وبعد إطلاق رؤية قطر الوطنية 2030 تم إجراء العديد من الدراسات والمناقشات والمشاورات المستفيضة، نتج عنها إعلان استراتيجية التنمية الوطنية 2011 إلى 2016 في شهر سبتمبر 2011 كوثيقة تعكس أولويات التنمية المستدامة في دولة قطر. وكون التعليم هو الركيزة الأساسية للتنمية البشرية، فإنه يعد أهم عوامل تحقيق دولة قطر لطموحاتها وفق تلك الرؤية ومواكبة التقدم العالمي القائم على اقتصاد المعرفة. ولقد تمت صياغة الاستراتيجية قطاع التعليم والتدريب بالتنسيق مع شركائنا في القطاع من الداخل والخارج، وتم وضع الخطط الاستراتيجية وخرائط طرق المشاريع لتتوافق مع جميع استراتيجيات التعليم العام والعالي، بحيث تتسق مع خطط المؤسسات الأخرى وتكون رافداً أساسياً لتحقيق تلك الرؤية. ولا شك أننا واجهنا وسنواجه العديد من التحديات لتنفيذ تلك الاستراتيجية، كموائمة التعليم العام والعالي والتقني مع احتياجات سوق العمل، وسد الفجوة بين التعليم العام والعالي بما يضمن تنفيذ هذه الاستراتيجية بنجاح. وبالتالي فإن التزامنا بالمشاركة المستمرة من قبلنا جميعاً يعد عاملاً أساسياً في نجاح مهمتنا، ولذا علينا أن نتكاتف معاً لمواصلة الجهود والتغلب على التحديات والصعوبات لإنجاح تنفيذ الاستراتيجية لقطاع التعليم والتدريب، حتى نتمكن من تحقيق أهدافنا المشتركة لبناء مستقبل مشرق للأجيال القادمة في دولة قطر. أشكر لكم حسن إصغائكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, good afternoon. My name is Scott Hill, and I serve as Director of the Office of Program Review and Audit, Supreme Education Council. Let me begin by echoing His Excellency's thanks to Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar and Dean Baybars. And Dean Baybars and Assistant Dean Fadel Anan for their support in bringing together us today to discuss this. I'm very appreciative of all of you for spending part of your time with us so that we can learn together about our national education strategy. So let me just begin by stepping back and acknowledging something that is important for all of us to have a shared understanding. Many sectors have, in the state of Qatar, have developed their work, they've hired consultants, they've done a variety of things. But under His Excellency's leadership, guidance, and direction, he has asked us to invest internally in the education sector to do our work. And in doing so, he has built a stronger Supreme Education Council, he has built a stronger capacity, and together we will all benefit from this. So it is appropriate for us to acknowledge His Excellency's leadership and direction on this, and I ask you to join me in thanking him for this. Okay, now let's move from this to a statement of the obvious. It is always not easy to talk about public policy. Public policy does not have the same sort of internal ring to it that we get from when we do things that connect with us in terms of, whether it is from hearing something, whether it's from seeing something, whether it's from some other direct experience. So we don't have the same power in public policy to think through and to experience and influence the same way we might when we are all united behind a sporting team, when we go to a football match and we're all rooting for our team. Or the same sort of oral experience we get from when we walk on a beach, or when we hear music. We don't get the same thing in our head when we think about public policy, do we? It's hard to connect to it. So what we're trying to do today is to give a sense of what is this public policy? What are we trying to do here with a national strategy for education? What do we think we can do? So in terms of where we're going to be today, here we go. Let me explain what I'm going to go through. We're going to talk a little bit about the basic background and reinforce some of the comments from His Excellency. We're going to talk about how we think about our projects in the national strategy as roadmaps. We're going to give some examples, and this will really be the core of our conversation today. Some examples of how these can help us address some of these major policy challenges and issues that maybe do connect in our lives. And then we're going to talk about what we can anticipate during this school year, since we're at the beginning of this wonderful year, in terms of next steps and participation as a sector in our strategy. Okay? Okay. Our national strategy is built upon several pillars. And let's just make sure that we all understand these pillars. As His Excellency mentioned, under the leadership of the Emir, we have the Qatar National Vision 2030. We also then have the National Development Strategy for 2011 to 16. This is our first 5-year roadmap. And finally, we have the Education and Training Sector Strategy. Now, our strategy itself is built on 5 programs. And when we think through these 5 programs sort of run across what you would call a very broad perspective. We have what we call cross-cutting. We have K-12, we have higher education, we have technical and vocational education, and we have scientific research. But what you will find, and what we will find, is that they're all cross-cutting. They're all influencing everything, okay? So we need to have that as a perspective. All right. So when we think about these pieces, the way that we dealt with all of these is we built roadmaps. And let me just explain. First, you have the presentation here in front of you. And then we will also put the presentation on our website so you can have ongoing electronic access to it, okay? Now, in thinking about what we did, I just want to explain, this is sort of traditional project planning exercise in terms of how we organize and structure our work, okay? So this is not something that you have to sort of look through and say, I don't remember, or whatever. But this is a typical way you would organize a project plan and roadmap. We talk about tasks, actions to support them, and output indicators. And then we talk about here other pieces that include lead organizations. They include then a timeline and resources. Now, typical way of organizing a project, right? So what are these projects? Let's now ask ourselves to think about, what do we mean by these projects? We had a total of 31 assigned to us. They came through a development process. As His Excellency mentioned, we were given these projects by a very diverse group that cross-cut our sector. And the job was to give us some sense of current challenges, where we can improve, and how we can go forward in the future. So the programs ranged across very broad visionary pieces to very, very specific challenges that we have in the sector, okay? And we're going to talk about how we connect and use these in just a minute. Key to this is understanding that we have a lot of partners in our work, okay? Our sector is a very diverse sector. It includes business representatives, the labor markets. It includes Qatar Foundation, Qatar University, Education City. It includes all of K-12. It includes what is a developing technical and vocational component. This is a very broad-based, very cross-cutting approach, okay? So when we think about all of these pieces here, how might we think about them both specifically and broad? How do they solve our problems? How do they end up being something that we can look at and say we're going to make progress from them? So let's take narrow examples and let's take broad examples just for a second, okay? And these will be items that you'll have access to. Let me just mention that on the SEC website, both in Arabic and English, all of the project plan roadmaps are available. An executive summary of the entire project is available as well, okay? So you will have access to and you can see these project plans, and we can talk about them and have dialogue about how we can best use them together. So some of the projects that we've been asked to undertake are fairly contained and fairly narrow. And just as you all at your institutional level have your own project plans and you do your own strategic planning, the National Education Strategy envisions that across the sector, led by the SEC, that we would be doing some of this work ourselves, okay? So for instance, we have Mr. Nasser Al-Malki is here, and he runs our Administrative Services Division at the SEC. Under that work, we've had a long-standing building plan for our schools because we are growing as a nation, and so we have a national infrastructure plan. One of our projects is to review that national infrastructure plan based upon the fact that we have more inputs that are going to be coming from different projects in our national strategy. So, if we want to improve and increase the availability of private schools, if we maybe are going to expand our technical and vocational secondary schools, what does that do to our infrastructure plan? So, even though we have an ongoing plan, our project would be, let's review the work we're doing now. Let's make sure that we've had a chance to provide input from it, revise the plan, and the project is then complete. And we move into more of an operational mode for the work, okay? We have other projects that are very similar to this. Here, in the midst of this wonderful building and within Qatar Foundation, Qatar Foundation, as you know, has its own very aggressive, very well-known scientific research agenda. And we have a scientific research project. And the goal of that project, we know that Qatar Foundation on a regular basis has been going through and doing its work with regards to national research priorities and having a national research plan. The plan within the National Education Strategy is to, let's step back, let's review and see, does that plan make sense given all the various inputs that we have, okay? So that's an example of how we have some very specific projects and how we have some projects that are fairly narrow in terms of what they're trying to do. Now, all of that sounds fine, but I'm sure for all of you, it's kind of like, that's fairly pedestrian, okay? That doesn't do much in terms of explaining sort of a national strategy with big implications. How do we tackle then the big stuff? How do we deal with the major challenges we face as a nation? Isn't that what a national strategy should do? Okay? That's our key question. So let's go through and ask ourselves how we would do that. What can a national strategy such as the one we've put in place offer us in terms of addressing some of those issues? So we're going to look at two examples. One example is going to be looking at student motivation, and the other one we'll look at, as His Excellency discussed, issues of alignment in our system. Okay. Now, think about student motivation. It is cited frequently as one of the biggest challenges we have in this nation for a variety of reasons. We look at issues around student readiness for higher education and employment. We look at issues such as student achievement and completion rates in K-12. We look at issues such as preparing students for the knowledge economy. And we ask, are our students doing what they need to do? And is a whole series of intrinsic and extrinsic factors driving their motivation? What can we do about this? Okay. So in our national strategy, we have a plan. We have a project that says, let's deal with student motivation. Now you look at this project and you say, wait. This makes no sense, okay? What's the project ask us to do? The project says our core approach to dealing with student motivation is we're going to develop a plan that is focused on making students and parents aware of the value of education. And you say, okay, that's all well and good, that's important. We need to know about the value of education here in the state of Qatar. But that can't possibly be the only response we're going to have to student motivation, right? And the answer, of course, it's not. On its own, a communication effort, as good as it is, cannot address our issues. So this begins to give us a sense. How do we as a sector, how do all of us engage in, participate in, and lead this effort? Because a communication effort and plan is really the culmination of a lot of work that all of us have to do together as a sector. All of us engaging in various components of work that will lead to increases in student motivation. So if you look at this slide that you have, look at how we've structured our projects, okay? We know that if we ultimately want a plan to increase student awareness and understanding, parent awareness and understanding, we have to backward map what affects that. So think about this, we look at more information and data that can be used by decision makers such as all of you. We think about professional development for our education professionals so that they understand how best to address the needs of students and identify the needs of students. We look at the use of ICT as a leading edge way of providing instruction that is itself motivating and energizing and capture students' interests. We look at issues such as building a broad-based objective qualifications framework that gives students a true picture every step of the way of where they stand in terms of qualifications and skills. We look at how we can start to get students to think early on about their future. How do we expose them to the work environment, okay? Now, you go through this list. These are all projects in our national strategy. Pretty cool. So this little Neuro Project all of a sudden begins to have a really broad support network to it. It begins to give us a sense, maybe with all of us working together, with all of us understanding the interconnections of work, we can begin to tackle this idea of student motivation in a really coherent way. So we sort of think, okay, now we're going to have a plan, and this plan by itself is going to then be based on all the great input from those people who were involved in these other projects. So these projects are built on lots of interdependencies. They're built on people such as all of you in this room, all the institutions that you represent, participating in, driving, leading, and lending your expertise and knowledge to what we need to know in terms of building not just those projects, but contributing to something like enhancing and increasing student motivation. And in turn, projects like this should have direct effects. If we can drive through this project increased enrollment in higher education, if we can drive through this project increased attendance in primary, preparatory, and secondary school, if we can drive through this project higher student readiness from early indications on, we're starting to then see the secondary effect of having such a project. This is what this strategy is designed to do. This is how we've tried to build connections, dependencies, and also to look at the need to engage everyone across the sector, okay? Now let me take one more example because it's maybe the one that we have to talk most about here in this setting. Let's look at alignment amongst K-12, higher education, technical and vocational education sectors, and then also the labor markets, okay? So when you think about those pieces, we all hear a lot, right? We know the story. Students come to higher education in the state of Qatar unprepared. That's a standard line we hear every day. Now, there are many ways to look at that issue. And every institutional focus on its own has its own story, its own explanation, and its own sense of why that's the case. And standalone, every institution on its own can make no progress in dealing with that issue. So how do we address it as a sector, okay? That's the key question. When you have a plan, when you have a project, so here, again, we have a project. Project is to do an alignment so that we have this seamless connection amongst institutions. And part of this specific project is, let's start building feedback mechanisms. Labor markets to K-12, labor markets to higher education to K-12, okay? K-12 to parents. How do we start to think about these feedback loops? How do you start to build that? What does that look like? Well, we're going to have to do something really strong in terms of creating information, so our databases become really important. We're going to have to do something really strong in terms of creating a common vocabulary amongst institutions so that when we say something, we actually mean the same thing. We're going to have to look at our learning expectations, our K-12 academic standards, along with the assessments we use, along with placement exams, along with admissions criteria, along with labor market demands, along with labor market criteria. We're going to have to look across the board. That's not one project. That is all of us. That is all of us trying to envision together how we create a dynamic, how we create a reality that says we have an aligned system. So when you look at this, you can see it's not one project. It's projects supporting each other. It's a sector supporting each other. So let me just give you one quick sense of these things. Within the SEC, we've started some of this work just trying to get some reflection on how do we create baselines? How do we understand where we are right now? And some of the work is really encouraging, and I know that there will be conversations going on within the SEC about some of the data that's being produced and about some of the findings that we're having, because they can establish potentially very promising bases for this kind of discussion that we need to have. So what's the takeaway from thinking about these kinds of projects? What's the takeaway that we have in terms of thinking about a national education strategy? Strategy is not designed by accident. The way that we've structured the projects is not designed by accident. The assumptions that the projects are interrelated and the assumption that the projects have to support across the sector is very meaningful, and it's very, very purposeful. But more important, there's an assumption that the way that we've structured the projects is also built around the notion that decision makers, such as all of you in this room, such as the people who lead our institutions, will be able to identify our policy priorities, and that regardless of how those policy priorities fit, we have established projects and roadmaps to support them. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about increasing the quality of the K-12 system, whether you're talking about alignment, whether you're talking about developing a technical and vocational system out of a fairly low baseline, or whether you're looking at increasing student motivation. Whatever the level of policy priority, we're going to have a way to structure these projects to support those efforts. Okay, now, what does that require? What does that mean? What are the opportunities for all of us during this year? So, it's a very interesting proposition for us to think as a sector when most of the times we think as an institution. And we all go through very serious processes here in the state of Qatar around strategic planning, around how we focus and envision our work. So one of our goals here in having our conversation today is to recognize that while the SEC is responsible, is charged with undertaking these projects on behalf of the education and training sector, we think the projects really allow for symmetry and synthesis and synergy amongst all of us as we're looking at our own plans. And so it is our hope that as you all are doing your work in your institutions, you are reviewing, you're looking at where there is efforts, you're looking at where there is potential for there to be a lot more conversation, there's a lot of engagement at a broad level where your work can feed into, support, and contribute to our strategy projects at the SEC and at the sector level. And also, at the sector level, we all need to learn from each other. We all need to know what everybody's doing because we know that those people who are charged most with doing things are going to have the most depth and talent to do it. So during this year, here's where we're going. We've started a number of projects, and we are developing steering committees made up of sector-wide participation. We've had sector-wide participation, as His Excellency noted, from the outset in this work, and that will continue. We always want to take advantage of what the institutions who are most relevant and engaged in this work can offer us. So steering committees guide our projects. We'll continue to ask the SEC Executive Committee and Board to guide us in terms of establishing our priorities. We think that they will be relevant to all of you in your priorities. And then we'll ask you, and we will hope that we will all continue in a dialogue around the work that we're doing together within our institutions and across our institutions. So now let's just sort of come back and finish up with just a very brief sense. You know, we started off with this idea that public policy is kind of hard to get a handle on. Sometimes it's hard to think what is relevant about these very abstract notions. They don't stick in our heads the same way that other things can stick in our heads. They don't make us feel united as citizens. They don't make us feel good as people. They don't give us the kind of very specific tactile responses that we all want and gain meaning from. Public policy really it exists in our heads. It exists as an effort by a people to do something together, okay? And for us, we have really clear benefits when we think about a world in which our sector is really engaging these efforts together. Think about the outcomes we have if we have a sector that succeeds in eliminating foundation programs. If we have a sector in which we are saving the state of Qatar millions a year because we no longer need to have separate and distinct placement and admissions exams institution by institution. Think about a sector that cuts time to degree for students because they enter higher education ready and because they are then ready to engage and become active citizens and to contribute to the knowledge economy. These are very important ideas that are absolutely possible because of the work in this sector. So, that is our message for today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd be more than happy to address any questions that you have. Thanks. Yes, please.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us today, and thank you also for the ministers comments. We really appreciate it. My name's Jocelyn Mitchell, and I'm from Northwestern in Qatar. And actually, your last point was very interesting about how we can possibly save Qatar efficiency, time, resources by combining our efforts. You were saying, working together. So especially you mentioned in the admissions policies. Yes. So could you elaborate a little bit more on what the SEC might be envisioning for the future of admissions policies, say, here in Education City?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, okay. So let me elaborate a little bit. Some of these, we have been now within the SEC having these dialogues for well over 1 year about how we address, admissions and placement is sort of the pivot point between what happens in K-12 and the indicators that institutions here in Education City and elsewhere need as evidence that students come prepared to undertake what we would call credit-bearing work, okay? So when you think about that, institutions have traditionally used a variety of indicators, mostly on their own, to think about this is an indicator that is satisfactory to our faculty, to our admissions people about readiness. Often here in the state of Qatar it includes a language proficiency exam, a numeracy exam, and then maybe other exams, whether they are broad-based like SAT, ACT, etc. Okay? But the reality is they're testing skills and knowledge, right? Well, throughout our entire system here, what do we do in K-12? We test skills and knowledge. And somewhere, what's missing is a connection between the knowledge and skill and performance in K-12 and what that translates into in terms of readiness. That's missing. It's not missing in terms of evidence because we do it actually. It's missing in terms of the conversation. So under His Excellency's guidance, we have been undertaking some studies and reviews. We are looking very closely at this issue because we believe it is an important conversation to have around what evidence do our students present? And is the idea here that maybe when you're doing a QCEA exam in 11th or 12th grade English, what if your performance level is telling you that you've met the same exact standard of competency as an IELTS or as a TOEFL at certain levels? I think that's a fairly interesting conversation to have. Why would we require students to take more than one exam demonstrating the same level of information? Why, and if higher education wants to be engaged in those conversations, I think it's a very interesting obligation from higher education to come to the table as well. It is not a one-way conversation. Higher education must also demonstrate a willingness to engage on, these are our clear expectations. Maybe they can be broad-based across institutions, maybe not. But we need to have that policy dialogue forced by what the strategy requires, which is an alignment set of projects. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your presentation. One of the key words that I've grasped from what you've said, and I think that is really important, is alignment. And I have two questions in terms of alignment and content. I've basically studied my elementary school in the US. So I've attended full-time public school in the United States. And one of the things that I learned is that the curriculum within the school was based on a county kind of framework. Now, per my understanding that the current system here in Qatar, each independent school is responsible for their own curriculum. Now, I understand in terms of alignment of the educational strategy and the Qatar national strategy, we all know that a huge section of the Qatar national strategy is social development, it's cultural development. I've heard that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the arts and the sports, especially the arts in the curriculum, is not being taught anymore. What are you doing in regards to that, and how does that align with the Qatar national strategy in terms of cultural development, and thought leadership? That's my first question, and if you allow me with the second. what are you doing in terms of alignment between the curriculums of each independent school and with the national strategy? Because if that is not aligned, along with, of course, the community sector, which is represented in the, we call them in Arabic, Majlis al-Amana. I'm not sure what the committee, no, it's not the parental committee. It's kind of like a committee in the school with the community in which they, discuss the school's curriculum and development and academic.
Okay.
You got my point.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for those questions. Let me address. So first, there is an absolute requirement that every school in the state of Qatar, every independent school, has the same curriculum standards. And there may be different ways of teaching and providing instruction on those standards. They may use different instructional materials, but the SEC has set forth very specific guidelines in terms of which instruction materials are approved. And so their choices are fairly narrow based upon materials that have been shown to be aligned to our curriculum standards. And second, there is no deviation permitted in terms of instruction against those standards. So if there is uneven performance, then we have monitoring systems and we have follow-up and intervention systems in place that are designed to ensure that all students have access to the Qatari national curriculum. Okay, so, and we have very specific projects in the national strategy to reinforce and to strengthen those pieces. With regards to the arts and physical education, it's a very good question. One of the key concepts in the national strategy was this idea that we need to be thinking about how we meet the needs of all students. Okay, and that's a very broad construction. So meeting the needs of all students is an important part of the dialogue, and ensuring that we have access to things like, for instance, specialized art schools or specialized physical education schools, in addition to what we see with Aspire, is part of what we'll be going through an examination on. I couldn't quite hear you. If you can.
Talking about embedding those within each school, I think that's one of the basics, basically.
Oh, you want to do it from there? Okay. Please go ahead and finish.
I was talking about embedding the arts and physical education within schools.
Yeah. Okay. Please go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I'm interrupt Scott, but I think this is my specialist area, and I'm answering the Arabic. طبعا حيث نعرف ان الكتب اللي في المدارس او مصادر التعلم هي مصادر تعود الى معايير مناهج موحده لدوله قطر، والمصادر تم اعدادها لدوله قطر بالاخص يعني عندنا كتب الشرعيه، اللغه العربيه، والكتب الاجتماعيات، وكتب العلوم والرياضيات. مثل ما تعرفون احنا توجه دوله قطر في نهج ثنائيه اللغه. يمكن بعض الموجودين هنا هم من يدرسوا في مدارس مستقله، او اغلب الموجودين هنا من يدرسوا في مدارس مستقله، وعارفين ان كانت تدرس عندنا عربي وانجليزي في العلوم والرياضيات، وهذه تم تعزيزه في الكتب الموجوده حاليا، وتم يعني احترام موضوع البحث والاستقصاء عند الطلاب في هذه الكتب. المدارس الخاصه بعد يعني احنا عندنا معايير ثابته للمدارس المستقله والخاصه بالاخص فيما يتعلق بالدين واللغه والتاريخ القطري، فهم ملزمين بتدريس التربيه الاسلاميه واللغه العربيه والتاريخ القطري. وحتى التاريخ القطري يعني احنا لان المفترض ان في دوله قطر ان احنا عندنا يعني ايمان كبير ان في حوار المجتمعات والانفتاح على الاخرين، فتدريس التاريخ القطري صار حق كل الموجودين في المدارس الخاصه سواء قطريين او غير قطريين، سواء كانت اللغه عربيه او غير عربيه. التاريخ القطري موفر باللغه الانجليزيه والعربيه. بس انا احب اخر نقطه اضيفها ان الاستقلاليه الموجوده للمدارس وفق معايير ثابته، سواء معايير مناهج، معايير مهنيه حق المعلمين، وحتى في موضوع القيم والهويه هي معايير ثابته ما تختلف من مدرسه لمدرسه. التنوع يحدث في الابداع في تنفيذ ما هو مطلوب منهم. شكرا.
شكرا استاذ صباح.
That was Ms. Sabah Al-Haydous, who is director of our Education Institute at the SEC.
Mr. Hill, I'd like to start by commending the effort of the education sector, starting from His Excellency the Minister down to everybody who works in the sector. You've done beautiful work in such a short time. However, as a man who works in planning, my name is Dr. Barak Saeed Yahya, and I am an expert in the General Secretariat for Development Planning. I feel that our big challenge is actually in education and training. It's, after all, it's making the human being. I looked at the promises that you have made, and they are beautiful promises. What can we anticipate happening this year? And I wish you the best of luck. I would have liked to see among these promises a comprehensive database that gives us the complete picture for education, training, and linking it to the need of the country, linking it to the labor market. I'm saying this because in May, we had a very important workshop on the attrition or the reluctance of Qatari secondary school graduates or male graduates in particular, when we looked at a very dismaying figure of 38% only of the Qatari male secondary school graduates going to universities and higher education, compared to an average of about 60% in the world. Now, we worked very hard, but we were blocked always by concrete walls when we didn't have the complete picture. We didn't know where the leakage was. We didn't know where percentage that we identified, for example, in the final year. Where did they go? We don't know. So I implore you that you should make this a priority if you want to make any advancement in the projects of the strategy.
So I really appreciate your comment, and I'd be happy to give you an update on this. So we have actually, it's a very interesting, very complex project, as he indicated, and it is to build a national information and training database. And the database is to be used as suggested within the education sector, but really as also links to other sectors in terms of what happens with people in employment, how does it link to, for instance, social service agencies, how does it relate to the labor markets, et cetera. It's a very broad-based perspective and a very broad-based need, obviously. So actually, I'm very pleased to report that we are, I think, essentially through the RFP process with steering committee, with getting the steering committee and the consultants in place, and the roadmap has been pretty much finalized in terms of the project plan, and it is a very high priority for this year, and it is going forward for this year, absolutely. So I'm more than pleased to report that as a progress step. Mr. Anand is telling me that we are completing ourselves for today, so we'd be happy to try to answer some more questions afterwards, but we really appreciate your time and energy and your willingness to come and visit with us today. Thank you very much.